We are in day 159 in 1 Kings 3. And oh, how I love that story of Solomon. And I know everyone's going to get so sick of me going, I love this. This is my favorite. But this one actually is one of my favorite. But then again, how do you pick favorites in the Bible? It's all so remarkable. So this is the story of King Solomon. And King Solomon had a dream. And in the dream, God asked him a question. And let's read about this because he knew it was from the Lord, because all the proof is in the pudding, if you will, because after this dream, God gave him such wisdom on how to rule his people with success. So let's read this. In Solomon's dream, God said, "What do you want? Ask, and I will give it to you." Solomon replied, "You showed me faithful love to your servant, my father David, because he was honest and true and faithful to you." So see, we have to do our part, don't we? "And you have continued your faithful love to him today by giving him a son to sit on his throne. Now, O Lord my God, you have made me king instead of my father David, but I am a little child who doesn't know his way around. And here I am in the midst of your own chosen people, a nation so great and numerous they cannot be counted. Give me an understanding heart so that I can govern your people well and know the difference between right and wrong. For who by himself is able to govern this great people of yours?" The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for wisdom. And so God replied, "Because you have asked for wisdom in governing my people and justice, and have not asked for a long life or wealth or death of your enemies, I will give you what you asked for. I will give you a wise and understanding heart, such as no one has ever had or ever will have. And I will also give you what you did not ask for, riches and fame. No other king in all the world will be compared to you for the rest of your life. And there's that if you follow me and obey my decrees and my commands as your father David did, I will give you a long life." So because he asked for God's wisdom, God was so pleased. And remember, we've been reading in the Proverbs saying, seek wisdom, get wisdom. Because if we have God's wisdom, then everything else follows behind that, because he's going to give us the knowledge and the wisdom, how to live our lives and what steps to take. And I love the verse that says the steps of the righteous are ordered by the Lord. So when we seek for wisdom, God orders our steps. And here's the perfect example of this. 2 prostitutes came in. They lived in a house alone, and they were both pregnant, and they had babies within 3 days of each other. But the prostitute who had the baby first, she accidentally rolled over on the baby and suffocated it, and the baby died. So what she did was she snuck in to the other prostitute's room, and she switched out the living baby for her dead baby. And the next morning, when the light came up, the mother immediately knew that the baby that was dead was not her baby. See, us mothers, our instincts, we know exactly who is our baby and who is not. So they went to King Solomon, and they explained the argument that the live baby's mine. No, the live baby is mine. And here is Solomon's wisdom put to the test right here. And this to me is so brilliant. So he said to his guardsmen, "Bring me a sword." And they brought a sword in. He said, "I'm going to cut the baby in half, and I'm going to give half of the baby to you and the other half to the other woman." And of course, the woman whose baby wasn't hers, she said, "Fine, then each of us will take half the baby," because she'd already lost her baby. But the mother of the live baby screamed out and said, "Please, I beg you, spare my baby. Give it to her. I would rather my baby be alive and be in her hands than be killed." And Solomon looked at him and he said, "That is the real mother of that baby." How amazing is that story? So then it moves on. He had 12 governors over 12 districts in all of Israel, and his kingdom was so encompassing what he needed just to feed his entire, what should I say, his kingdom, I guess you could say, all the people who lived for the king. It was so vast that he was smart and gave 1 month to every governor who oversaw that district. And once a year for that month, they were in charge of feeding everyone in the king's palace. And I'm going to read to you the mass hordes of things that they needed just to feed the people in the king's palace. But here's the wisdom in that. If you think about it, how brilliant was that? Because if you only had 1 month a year to feed the king's palace, you're going to try to outdo everybody. First of all, it takes out the logistics of everybody trying to figure out who's going to give what when. All those logistics were over. Plus, if it was my month, I'd be like, oh no, we're going to prepare 11 months and make sure that we give them the best, because that's a reflection on my governorship. So how brilliant was that? So I want to read you just how encompassing and how huge this was, because it said that the Israelites were more vast than the sand of the sea. So it says here, first of all, the people were very content during Solomon's rule. With plenty to eat and drink, Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms from the Euphrates River to the north of the Palestinian borders to Egypt in the south, this huge kingdom. And may I add, after we read this, I have to tell you something. It says the daily food requirements for Solomon's palace were 150 bushels of choice flour, 300 bushels of meal, 10 oxen from the fatted pens, 20 pasture-led cattle, 100 sheep or goats, as well as deer, gazelles, roe deer, and plenty of poultry. Can you imagine? That's what it took for 1 month in the palace. And during the lifetime of Solomon, all of Judah and Israel lived in peace and safety because they had a wise king. And I want to say this, that I kind of did a little study on how wealthy he was, because it says he was the wealthiest man that had ever lived then and since then to this day. His wealth equates today to $2.1 trillion. He controlled all the copper. It says his entire throne was solid gold overlaid with ivory. It's all of his utensils, everything that they used, the cups, the utensils, the plates, everything was solid gold. He acquired such vast wealth that it was almost uncountable as the people of Israel. And it says here that he was so wise that God gave him such very great wisdom and understanding and knowledge, and as vast as the sands of the seashore. In fact, his wisdom exceeded in all that of all the wise men of the East and wise men of Egypt. He was wiser than anyone else. Not only that, he composed some 3,000 proverbs, wrote over 1,000 songs. He could speak with authority over all kinds of plants and insects and animals and creatures and fish. And kings from every nation sent their ambassadors just to listen to the wisdom of Solomon. And because he asked for wisdom, God gave him everything far and above that. We are in Acts 6. And I'm going to title this one, That People Do Not Change. There were grumblings amongst the believers in the biblical days, right after Jesus ascended to heaven. And there are grumblings today between different denominations, different belief systems. So basically, we're all the same. We don't change. And what happened here is the Greek believers were in conflict with the Hebrew-speaking believers because they felt like they were being slighted, that their widows weren't being fed the same rations as the Hebrew ones. So I think this is wisdom. And here's where I say we all need to stay in our own lanes. We all have different talents. I happen to be a creative person. Thank God I have a woman that works for me that takes care of all my finances and taxes and all that stuff, because that is not my forte. But I'll tell you what, I can walk in and size up a house and redesign a house and renovate. That's my forte. So you have to stick with what you're good at. So here's what the 12 disciples said. They said, we should not have to be worrying about daily rations of food for the people today, because again, the new believers, the New Testament believers, were like the social system that we have today. They felt called to feed and take care of the people around them that were less fortunate. And I believe churches are called to do that today. We are called to feed the poor, take care of the widows, take care of the orphans. That's what we're supposed to do, is go out and help other believers that might be struggling during certain times. So here's what the 12 disciples decided on. The 12 called a meeting of all the believers, and they said, we apostles should spend our time teaching the word of God, not running a food program. They knew what their strengths were. And so, brothers, select 7 men who are well respected and full of the Spirit and wisdom. We will give them the responsibility. Then we apostles can spend our time in prayer and teaching the word. Well, they chose 7 men, but one stood out particularly, and his name was Stephen. And it says that Stephen was a man full of faith and filled with the Holy Spirit. And I love what it says. These other 7, they were equipped and they were wonderful. The other 6, actually, there were 7 total. But there was something special about that Stephen, because Stephen, it says, a man full of God's grace and power, performed amazing miracles and signs among the people. He was gifted as being a faith healer. So Stephen could go around and pray and had miraculous things happen just like Jesus did. But you know what happens when you're totally anointed? What happens? People start attacking you. And the religious people in the temple, they started making up lies about him, saying, he's blasphemous. He's talking against the temple and talking against the law of Moses, which he didn't. It was a total lie. It was a conspiracy theory, if you will, because they couldn't handle that he was so anointed by God that they hated it, that so many people's lives were being changed. Because during that time, it said they were seeing multitudes coming to Jesus and lives being changed forever. So here's what they did. After they accused him of all this blasphemous stuff that wasn't true, at this point, everyone in the high council stared at Stephen because his face became as bright as an angel's. So when they brought him in and they were convicting him and saying he was blasphemous, what are they going to say when literally his face became as bright as an angel's? Well, it's pretty hard at that point to deny that Stephen was anointed by Jesus, because all the other religious leaders aren't seeing those manifestations. But Stephen was called by God. Okay, we are in Psalm 126 today, and I love this. And the other nations said, what amazing things the Lord has done for them. See, even though they had enemies surrounding them, and they had a lot of naysayers, they still had to watch the miraculous things that happened through the Israelites, because God was fighting their battles. God was blessing them wherever they went, if they were obedient, if they followed God's ways. So even if they didn't believe like the Israelites, they knew that they were called by God and there was something different, that they had to believe in the one true God because they saw all these miraculous signs around them. So it says, what amazing things the Lord has done for them. Yes, the Lord has done amazing things for us, they answered. What joy! Restore our fortunes, Lord, as streams renew the desert. Those who plant in tears will harvest in shouts of joy, meaning it isn't going to be easy. There's still a lot of labor. There's still a lot of hard work to do when you're out there ministering the gospel, but yet there's always joy in the morning because we know we're doing what the Lord has called us to do. It says they weep as they go to plant their seed, but they sing as they return the harvest. And that's talking about souls. It's tough when you go out and you're called in to say the mission field, but yet when you see all those people come to Jesus, it is worth all the hard work. It's worth everything. And then in the Proverbs 16, 26 and 27, it is good for workers to have an appetite. An empty stomach drives them on. Boy, isn't that right? We work harder when we're hungry and when we need something. Scoundrels create trouble. Their words are a destructive blaze.